crime scene. It seems like any other Monday morning for George Weeks, who was reporting for work as a farmhand at Smith Farm on November 14, 1842. As he normally did, he walked to Smith Farm from his house about a quarter of a mile away. As he approached the Smith Farm property, something immediately caught his attention. Mr. Smith's dog was barking wildly from within the workshop, located some distance from the farmhouse. This was unusual because Mr. Smith usually kept his dog with him overnight in his bedroom. Mr. Weeks then noticed that the window from the east room of the farmhouse was shattered. Now suspicious of foul play, he looked into the window in front of the house and saw Mr. and Mrs. Smith laying on the floor covered in blood. Weeks immediately ran back to his house for help and returned soon after with few neighbors. Upon entering the house, they saw that Mr. and Mrs. Smith had been murdered. Mr. Smith was in the habit of sitting in front of the fire after tea with feet on the fireplace crane that hung over the fire. It was surmised that after a blow to the head, he fell off his chair and the fireplace crane swung his feet into the fire, which then burned the lower part of his body. Rebecca Smith's body was found next to her husband to his right. Whitney reported that Miss Smith was lying in the right corner of the fireplace, her head at the corner of the hearth. Her dress was bloody down to her waist. She seems from the appearance to have struggled. There was blood in the middle of the floor and spread to the place where she lay. Blood droplets were found elsewhere throughout the house. Various footprints were also discovered, as were a hammer and an axe at the crime scene, which may have been used to commit the murders. Four people connected with the Smith family have been determined to be suspects. George Weeks was not being one of them because his alibi checks out with multiple sources. Alexander lay with his head from the fireplace. His body was chiefly consumed up to his third or fourth rib. His body was examined by Dr. Ray. There were 3 wounds on the left side of his head, immediately over the lower portion of the cartilage of the left ear, making 3 holes through the cartilage, large cut at the anterior and posterior cartilage of the same ear. The skull was fractured on the top of his head. The wound must have occasioned the death. Wounds have been inflicted with some heavy instrument like a hammer with a flat end. No appearance of his has struggled. He thinks deceased must have been lying upon his back when the wound upon the top of his head was inflicted. Miss Smith was lying in the right corner of the fireplace, her head at the corner of the hearth. She has 2 wounds upon her forehead, one producing a fracture of the skull, the other a depression. There were 4 wounds upon the upper and posterior part of the head, one creating a depression of the bone. Supposes the same instrument has been inflicted the wound that supposed the cause of death of Alexander. Her dress was bloody down to her waist. Suppose some of the wounds on Mrs. Smith's head had to be inflicted when she was lying down. Her death must have been occasioned by the wounds referred to. She seems from the appearance to have struggled. There was blood in the middle of the floor and spread to the place where she lay. From the physicians thinks Mr. Smith must have been killed first. Anton came in through the east room window, leaving footprints and his A-positive blood along with fingerprints as he came in through the window with glass on the ground. Anton snuck in quietly and unexpectedly, striking Alexander in the left posterior portion of the ear with a hammer, leaving B-negative blood, killing him instantly. Leaving Miss Smith shocked, he went over to Miss Smith, leaving a struggle between the two. Finally, after struggling for a few seconds, he strikes Miss Smith in the posterior head, leaving her dead. Because of the links between Henry's shoe impressions on the front porch and fingerprints on the tea porch, led us to believe that he only came for tea, and we would have to do further investigation because there were no DNA evidence found. Anton was German, and we believe that his motive of killing Mr. and Mrs. Smith was that he couldn't speak English and he believed that Mr. Smith mocked him. This is why we believe that Anton is our criminal, and now he is locked up.